Tonight we're joined by Bridget Fox and Jack Taylor from the Woodland Trust, and they're going to take us away with a presentation. If anyone has any questions while they're going through that, if they could drop them into the question section, and then at the end of the presentation we'll have time to go to those, or people can raise their hands and we can come to you. So Jack, Bridget, if you'd like to take it away, over to you.
Sure, thank you very much, Heather. Hello, everyone. I'm Jack Taylor. I am the lead campaigner for the Woods and the Threat team in the Woodland Trust. Bridget, do you want to introduce yourself quickly? So we just do that before we get started.
Hi, my name's Bridget Fox. I'm in the External Affairs team, so we deal with government affairs, public policy, and I respond to all the local plan consultations on behalf of the Woodland Trust in the South East region.
Brilliant, thank you. And as it says at the title there, we are here to talk to you about woods, about trees, and about the wonderful planning system. So hopefully we catch your interest. What do we do? The Woodland Trust? Well, lots of things, but we're really going to talk to you a little bit about how we sort of going to work in the sphere of the planning system today. I'm part of the campaigning team and work within the sort of Woods and the Threat team within that. So our role as a team is to identify threats to ancient woods and veteran trees and then respond to those accordingly. So a lot of our work is through the planning system, but we use a few means in which to sort of achieve these aims. We use policy, we use advocacy, and we use a little bit of sort of hard, direct campaigning sometimes as well, getting out onto the streets. So how do we approach threats? We're a pretty small team. My team, the Woods and Threat team, is only 5, and we are currently 2 vacancies down at the moment, but we are supported by a wonderful volunteer network. A lot of our work revolves around planning and around development threats. We're using our evidence basis all the time in order to sort of inform our decisions, inform our responses to certain developments. We have lots of lovely internal expertise as well to sort of help us along the way, Bridget being one of those, but lots of good sort of ecologists, conservationists who know a lot about trees, about wildlife, who are able to sort of support the work we do. What do we do when we're doing it? So a lot of the time we are working within the sort of planning sphere, so we're writing technical responses to planning applications. That involves a desktop review of the available information. And we are often working to a precautionary principle as well. So what I mean by that is we are essentially looking at whether a development might impact on an ancient wood or an ancient veteran tree. And we are looking, we would sort of take the approach that if there is likely to be damage, we are going to put in a sort of objection or sort of register our concerns to that sort of proposal. So we might then sort of scale back the level of our sort of objection or our opposition to that particular scheme, but it entirely sort of depends on further conversations we might have with the local planning authority or the developer. These are the sort of key threats to woods and trees that we see. So like I say, we often work within the sort of development sector. So I'd say probably about 95% of our work is sort of resource towards working on development threats, but there are a whole load of other threats to woods and trees. And all of these will kind of act cumulatively on ancient woodlands. So other sort of threats that we're aware of and that we have to do some work around. Deer and overbrowsing, obviously quite a big one. So deer grazing is a really serious issue. Deer populations are quite heavily out of control, especially in sort of certain pockets of the UK too. Scotland is losing a lot of woodland at the moment from it just being simply browsed away by deer. So a real issue, something we need to be working on. Invasive non-native species, so stuff like rhododendron, Himalayan balsam, Japanese knotweed. These are all species that can take a real stranglehold on ancient woodland and outcompete the sort of native, good, ecologically sensitive flora that we like to see in these sites, and that alters the whole sort of ecosystem within these woods. Climate change, I don't know how much I need to say about that. The world is on fire. and there's not a huge amount that we can do about it. We work so much in development because we have a means of influencing the planning system. Climate change is one of those fairly existential threats, but we have to sort of push government to do better, to meet their sort of carbon targets, to not be approving big old road schemes, that sort of thing. Pests and diseases, obviously a serious issue as well. Ash dieback has really taken a hold in the UK. We're likely to lose a pretty high percentage of our ash trees over the next few decades as well, sadly. Nitrogen pollution or air pollution more widely is having an impact on a lot of woods, causing deterioration of their condition, often affects the floral composition of woodlands, and in turn that again affects the rest of the ecosystem. And woodland mismanagement, so felling woods, woods not being managed in the right way, woods being sort of sold off to development, all that sort of stuff. You know, we try to get involved in that where we can, but there's only so much we can do. So we focus on development, and these are some of the impacts of development. So I've got this lovely graphic here that was produced for our planner's manual, which I would encourage you all to read. And this gives you sort of a flavour of the different developments, the development types, and how they impact differently on ancient woodlands. So housing, for example, has a lot of different sort of indirect impacts on ancient woodland when it's plonked next to it. Not least being sort of recreational disturbance from humans, from their pets, from trampling of vegetation to littering to removal of deadwood. All of that sort of disturbance can be pretty heavily impactful on an ancient woodland that is sensitive fauna and flora. You might get pollution in the form of sort of air, dust, noise and light. So noise and light you would often see from stuff like quarrying, you would see that from housing as well. Air pollution you would often get for agricultural activities, dust pollution from quarries as well. So these are serious things that are degrading ancient woods. Fragmentation, roads cutting woods in half, housing, new housing sort of splitting up woods from each other within the landscape, taking up other sort of pockets of green space that are used to sort of important wildlife corridors and links. So fragmentation is a pretty serious issue too. Invasive species, I've talked about them. We have no control over what people put in their gardens. So when you have new housing developments, people might want to plant rhododendron. Not very good for any adjacent ancient woods. Hydrology, affecting the hydrological condition of an ancient woodland is pretty serious. Again, it's one of those things that has knock-on impacts. You affect the hydrological condition, affect the sort of floor composition of that wood and the soil nutrients. And that has knock-on effects all the way through the ecosystem. So there's a lot of different impacts that you can find on development. But yeah, have a look at this. Probably can't read all that small writing, but it's the graphic is in within our planner's manual, which is really good. We also deal with threats to neighbourhood and urban trees. So it's not just ancient woods and ancient veteran trees, although that is most of our focus. We also look to try and save neighbourhood, urban trees, street trees where possible. They come into conflict with people, sadly. It would be lovely if humans and nature and trees and wildlife could all be all lovely and harmonious. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Not everybody looks at trees as the amazing things they are. They might be concerned that the tree is causing shading in their garden, interrupting TV signal, leaf litter, clogging up gutters, animal droppings on cars, all that sort of stuff. It ticks people off, and people sometimes want to remove trees on those bases, which is something we want to sort of get over. There's a cultural sort of bridge to cross there. There are more serious issues, of course, so trees being actually sort of dangerous or being health and safety issues, potentially sort of individual limb or total failure of that tree, and subsidence as well. So the impact that trees have on sort of soils, and then the impact that has on the foundations and the stability of buildings. So subsidence is a tricky one, can result in the removal of a lot of trees as well, especially larger ones. Neighbour disputes. People don't like their neighbours' trees, they want them cut back, they want stuff doing to them. Again, not everybody treats trees in the same way. And then accidental damage and also deliberate vandalism. So whether that's people knocking into them with heavy machinery or maybe someone coming back from the pub after a few too many drinks and deciding to swing on a newly planted tree and break it in half. You know, these things happen. We've got to try and bridge that sort of kind of cultural divide there. So what protections do woods and trees actually have? broken this up into two distinct sort of categories. So we've got legal protections and then policy protections. Whoopsie. Legal protections, there are very few for trees. Most of them come through tree preservation orders, TPOs. I'll talk about them in a moment, or conservation areas. So if that's designated, is usually on sort of villages and sort of small towns where those conservation areas would be applied. There is some protection for trees through criminal damage, vandalism. So I'm sure a lot of people on this might have heard of the sycamore gap tree and what happened with that tree. Obviously, when it happens, there's nothing you can really sort of do about it. The idea is that the criminal damage and vandalism of that tree should be a deterrent to doing it in the first place. I suppose you wouldn't expect any normal person to do what happened there in the first place. But yeah, there are sort of very few legal protections actually out there for our trees. And then policy, Bridget's going to tell you a little bit more about policy in a moment. And how that sort of interplays with woods and trees. But ancient woods and ancient veteran trees do receive protection through planning policy. There's lots of issues, lots of loopholes, lots of things to get sort of caught up in. But the idea is that national planning policy should protect new development should protect, ancient woodlands and ancient veteran trees from new development. And then tree preservation orders. So how do they protect trees? Ideally, if a tree protection order is set by a local planning authority, typically a tree officer or the planning team, then that TPO acts as a means of anybody who wants to do work to that tree would need to require permission from the local planning authority to do so. They'd have to submit an application that would need approving. There's opportunity for people to comment on that. And if they don't have any permission and they undertake their works without that permission, then they will be subject to potential prosecution and fines as well. It is worth noting that TPOs are not very effective if there is a planning application involved. Planning permission does override TPOs, and they can also be removed by the local council. Bridget's going to talk to you a bit more about this, but just a short note on some of the good things that we use to help us. Natural England Forestry Commission standing advice is a really key bit of guidance and advice that we use, and that all consultants and planning authorities should use when assessing how development might affect ancient woods and ancient veteran trees. So it contains really good stuff around mitigation that you can explore, stuff like buffers between ancient woods and ancient veteran trees. But there's some good advice out there and guidance. We're always looking to try and get that to be improved. So, Bridget, I believe I'm handing over to you now. So, yeah, take it away.
Thanks, Jack. So we've heard a bit about the threats to woods and trees and the way we work to protect from individual threats. And I'm going to talk a bit about how we work with the planning system more broadly to get better protection written in for woods and trees to the rules in the first place, and hopefully you can try and do the same in your local area. So the first point to make is that we do work in a plan-based system. It may not always feel like this when you're objecting to a terrible development proposal near you, but this is a rules-based system. People can't just build anything anywhere. And your local plan for your area, your district or borough, sets the rules for what can be built and where it can be built in your local area. And it also sets out the areas which can't be built on. And of course, for us as a nature charity, that's equally important. The local plan doesn't exist in isolation. It sits under a whole raft of national legislation. And the most important bit of that, probably for our purposes, is the National Planning Policy Framework, which sets out the policies that have to be in every local plan. And that was updated most recently in December. But within that, there's quite a lot of leeway in your local plan. For example, a university city like Canterbury might have policies on student housing, which wouldn't perhaps be so appropriate in Sevenoaks. A rural district might have policies on farm buildings, which wouldn't be appropriate in Folkestone Hythe, where they might have policies on flood defence and seaside hotels and so on. So there's quite a lot of local variation that can be reflected in the local plan. Now, I'm going to talk about the planning system as it is now. But we are always facing change. There's a new planning and infrastructure bill going through Parliament as we speak, which actually is proposing some quite radical changes to the plan making and planning decision process. And we've also got local government reorganisation coming down the track, though not as imminently in Kent as in some other counties. And so everything I'm saying, you kind of have to check against delivery. But this is the system we're working in for now, and will probably realistically be in place for at least the rest of this year, because it takes a while for legislation to change things. Okay, so talking about as we are now, every area, as I say, has a local plan, and that's the rule book for development in your area. So if you're worried about a particular planning proposal for a new building or a new area for development, the most important thing is to check it against your local plan and see the extent to which it fits with those rules, because if it breaks those rules, you've got really good grounds to fight it. And that's why we work so hard to get the right rules in place in the first place. And when you look at your local plan, there's a huge amount of information in there, but basically it falls into two broad areas. The development management policies, which describe how things should be built, for example, building heights or how much green space must be available to local homes. And it also sets a broad approach to things like nature conservation. And then the site allocations, which are where things can be built. And they might be presented as a map, or they might be presented as a narrative, or a bit of both. All those sites have to comply with the area-wide rules, but they may have additional rules set for a site. So, for example, if there's ancient woodland next to the site, we would hope that the rules for that particular site would include ancient woodland buffering, or it might be a target for new trees, or it might say that a major housing development has to provide for a new school as well, or something like that. Now we know that, well, I spend a lot of time worrying about the development management policies. We know that many people, particularly people on this call, may be more worried about the site allocations, where stuff will be built. And it's quite important to understand how this works. I sometimes feel sorry for planners, even as I'm writing objections to send to them, because they can be a bit piggy in the middle on this. Local planning authorities are given national legally binding to make targets for new housing numbers. They have to find enough sites to meet those housing targets, but they're often doing that in the face of local communities who are up in arms to protect the areas they love. So it can be quite a contested process. There will be a long list of sites, and councils do a call for sites to invite people to suggest sites for development. And sometimes landowners and would-be developers are wildly over-optimistic, from their point of view, putting through sites for development that will never get through planning. And I would say don't get too exercised at this stage, because planners are quite good at filtering out that long list and only bringing forward a short list. They have to consider every site that's suggested, but they're quite savvy about only bringing through sites which are broadly in compliance with planning law. And so hopefully the most precious sites would already be excluded at that stage. Even if it's not filtered out by the planners, we will speak up against any site allocations or ask for extra conditions if the proposals affect ancient woodland, ancient and veteran trees, or indeed, as landowners, Woodland Trust sites, and we've got a lot of sites across Kent. And ancient woodland is woodland that was already there when comprehensive maps were done in 1600. There hadn't been much new planting before that, so if woodland was around in 1600, it had probably always been wooded since the end of the Ice Age, and Kent is a hotspot for that fantastic medieval or older woodland that we need to preserve. The good news is that, as Jack said earlier, in planning law, ancient woodland is protected. It's got explicit protection as an irreplaceable habitat in the National Planning Policy Framework. And we rely on this a great deal when we comment on local plans, policies, and also individual planning applications. There is a bit of a weasel words get out in the footnote. I've blown it up on this screen, although it's in tiny little writing in the NPPF, which says that major infrastructure projects count as exceptional circumstances. And we just had a horrendous example of that with the Lower Thames Crossing, a new motorway going right through some amazing habitat. So sadly, infrastructure gets a get out of jail free card. But for most development, ancient woodland is fully protected, and that's great news, and something that the Woodland Trust, before my time, I can't take personal credit, worked very hard to get into planning law. And the good news is that there was an important test case just over the county boundary in Wealdon a year ago, where the planning inspector, who brings a very dispassionate, legalistic approach to consider planning disputes, ruled that a lack of housing supply did not constitute exceptional circumstances to allow ancient woodland to be destroyed. So that was a really good test case for that planning policy, and we're really glad to see that the law is on our side. So if you're worried about a site or you're worried about protecting ancient woodland, it's really good to know if there is ancient woodland there. How do we find this out? Well, there is the Ancient Woodland Inventory, which is one of many data sets available on a fantastic website produced by DEFRA called Magic Maps. And it almost is magic. You can spend hours there looking at all sorts of different fascinating data layers. But the one we're interested in the drop-down menu, there's a habitats layer. I'm afraid the screenshot's very clear, but you can see for yourselves in real life afterwards. Then a woodland layer, and then underneath there's 2 categories for ancient woodland because some was added to the register more recently. So if you tick those, you then get a map showing you where your ancient woodland is. And there's an example here coming up any minute. I think my slides are frozen. Oh, there we are. Fantastic. Of the area around Hythe. So this is Hythe in Kent. Hythe is that orange urban area in the centre of the map there. You've got the motorway. And those green, those hashed patches with a border around them, there are the ancient woodland. The vertical stripes are your semi-natural woodland, like the picture behind me. This is our Ashenbank Wood in North Kent. They're your typical bluebell woods that are undisturbed. And then also the ones with the brown horizontal hatching, they're plantations on ancient woodland soil. So although they may not look as pretty, they have the same protection in planning law, and they are just as valuable for carbon sequestration and for nature as all other kinds of ancient woodland. And sometimes you'll get one wood that's got a mixture of both because of how it's been managed over the years. And if you look just west of Sandling Station there in the middle of the screen, you'll see there's one wood that's got a bit of green and a bit of orange. And that can be quite typical, but they're both equally protected. So that's ancient woodland. When it comes to ancient and veteran trees, they have the same protection in planning law as irreplaceable habitats, but the problem is they're not as comprehensively mapped. They're not on the Ancient Woodland Inventory, and not all of them are within ancient woodlands. So we at the Woodland Trust hold a fantastic citizen science database called the Ancient Tree Inventory, which seeks to record these living legends, because if you don't know where they are, it's much harder to protect them. They might have legal protection, but if you haven't identified one tree as benefiting from that protection, it's much harder to apply it in practice. Now, our amazing volunteers have mapped about 200,000 ancient veteran trees, which sounds really impressive. Unfortunately, or fortunately, when we had the ATI audited against different habitat types, it's estimated there are 2 million ancient and veteran trees to find. So a long way to go. And we would love to have more tree spotters and verifiers who are interested in that. Do contact us. But this is an example about what the ATI looks like. And again, it's that area around Hythe. Now, Hythe's at the bottom of the screen. Now, you might remember from 2 screens back, there's no ancient woodland in that town area of Hythe that was orange town area on the previous map. But you can see there's a whole cluster of individual ancient and veteran trees there. And so that makes the case that it's really important when we're looking at development sites, even if they're not heavily wooded, to make sure that we've mapped and can protect individual ancient and veteran trees. And we really welcome your help in making that possible. The NPPF doesn't just talk about ancient woodland and ancient and veteran trees. It's got other policies on trees and nature. So it speaks up for trees in towns, encouraging retaining existing trees and having tree-lined streets. And there are some general policies to encourage protecting the natural environment, and particularly now with local nature recovery strategies becoming a thing in policy. As some of you may have responded to the consultation on making space for nature in Kent and Medway a few weeks ago, having these ecological networks protected in local plans is also really important. And there's a whole lot of things we ask for. Actually, when it comes to it, I ask for when we respond to local plans, and we welcome other people speaking up for the same things. So when it looks at the policies around development sites, we want to see existing trees protected and more trees provided, pretty much. And if trees have to be lost, we want to set really demanding replacements for that, partly to discourage developers removing trees in the first place, but also to make sure there's a net uplift in our tree canopy cover. Because even though Kent's one of the woodier bits of the UK, generally speaking, we're the least wooded country in Europe. And the Committee on Climate Change has said we need more trees everywhere, pretty much, to make us resilient for the future, as well as to protect against those devastating losses of things like ash dieback. So we need to be planting more trees in the right place, and having that written into your local plan is a great way to make sure that happens. But we also want to see the value of trees and nature celebrated throughout the local plan, with policies on things like flood resilience and air pollution, recognising the role of nature-based solutions. And there's some great policies around the county. This is Dover's tree plan. Dover adopted their local plan last year, and they've got this great policy. It's quite a long policy. I've only picked out 3 bits here, but these are really good examples that go beyond what's in the MPPF and show how a local plan can add value. So they've specified that if you plant any new dwelling has to have a minimum of 2 new trees. That's even before any trees have been lost. So that's really fantastic. And new trees for office space as well, which is often a neglected area. If you think about, business parks with their huge car parks, they're often quite sterile and devoid of nature. So in Dover, they're making sure there are going to be trees everywhere, which is great. And they've specified from native Kent species, local provenance, biosecure. We don't want another Dutch elm disease. We don't want another ash dieback. And where we get our trees from is really important. So it's great to see a council taking leadership on that in their local plan. And if trees are lost, Dover says you've got to provide 2 for each tree that's gone, which is really fantastic as well. And if you want to see a really strong policy on tree replacement, hop over into East Sussex or possibly West Sussex, somewhere in Sussex, Crawley, it's in Sussex. And they've got this fantastic policy, DD4, I love it, DD4, tree replacement standards, and they've got this ratio, depending on how big the tree is, how many trees you've got to plant to replace it. Because there's no point, well, there is some point, but there's limited value in cutting down a fantastic big oak tree and replacing it with a little sapling, however beautiful. So Crawley is on the money in terms of being robust about tree replacement, and that's the sort of plan policy we love to see. Another big driver for getting more trees and protecting the trees we've got is biodiversity net gain. You've probably heard all about this. It's been in place for about a year. A requirement for all developments to deliver more habitat and better habitat. Might seem quite hard to do when you're actually building on some of the stuff in the first place, but there are increasingly robust policies around this, and there's a national metric for how it's measured. Some sites you can provide the biodiversity net gain on the site. So suppose you've got, I don't know, an office block with a car park, you demolish the office block and build housing, but then you convert the car park to green space. You're building on the site, but you're also getting a net gain for nature. Some people are doing it off-site by buying or paying for other people to do nature recovery elsewhere. Both approaches have benefits for nature, but the most important thing is that your local council is asking for the maximum it can get. So the legal minimum is 10%, but we're really pleased to see councils like Maidstone, again, who adopted their plan last year, pushing the boundary and asking for 20%. More of that, please. And then when it comes to individual sites, again, you might be not wanting a site allocated for development at all, and we can understand that. But when we're looking at what's being proposed, we've got 2 big asks. One is to protect the trees we've got, particularly ancient woodland and veteran trees. And that's about having proper buffers between development and the trees, not only for what's going to be built, but also for construction activity where you might have a temporary access or a temporary buildings work site. It's really important that ancient woodlands protected from that as well, because those work sites might be temporary, but the harm they can do can be permanent. And we saw that with HS2. We're worried we're going to see that with the Lower Thames crossing. We really want local planners to be vigilant to protect ancient woodland from all kinds of harm. And the other part of it is to increase tree canopy, particularly in areas which are short of trees. So this is the other end of the scale. Your rural areas have got fantastic ancient woodland to protect. Your urban areas may not have enough trees to start with, and your local plan is a great way to get that addressed as well. We've produced something called the Tree Equity Score, which maps all the urban areas across England. In fact, I think it's UK-wide, yeah, UK Tree Equity Score. And it gives each a score out of 100. 60 is a really low score. 100 is where you want to be. And basically, if your area is green on the map, you're probably quite good tree equity. But if it's coloured orange, then there's more need for trees. And so that's a really good way to look at what's you can get something good out of a development on an already urban area. So if the local plan sets the rules, how do you influence it? Well, it goes through lots of stages, but there are 2 main consultation stages. Regulation 18 is early in the process. Sometimes it's quite a detailed draft per plan, but sometimes it's just high level consultation on what your overall vision for the area is. But it's a good chance for you to express any views you want. There's no rules about what you say at Regulation 18. And if you're really obsessed with getting, I don't know, more traditional chestnut coppice for hot poles, this is your chance to speak up for it. Regulation 19 is the final consultation, and that's, you can only comment on whether the draft plan complies with national planning law or not. So that's why it's really important to look for those hooks in the national planning policy framework on which you can hang any objections or any requests for more and better policies. Each local planning authority has its own timetable. They will have something called a local development scheme, which sets out the timetable for the local plan in your area. If your local authority is on the left-hand side of the screen from Dartford to Thanet, your local plan's been done. So you might not have a chance to speak up and change it anytime soon, but it's worth looking for them producing additions to the local plan in the form of supplementary development policies. Tunbridge Wells has nearly completed its final stage, which is being examined by a planning inspector. Not much chance to influence that one now. But if you're in one of the local authorities on the right-hand side, the good news is that all of these are due to have local plan consultations later this year. I say due to have because with changes to the national law, some of those might go on hold for a bit, but this is what we're expecting. Ashford in particular is due any day soon, with Medway and Gravesham coming up quite soon after that. So if you're in those areas, look out for those local plans. And if you want to know what to say, or you want help framing an objection or a comment, then do use the Kent Planning Network for Nature to ask your questions and hopefully get the answers you need. Even with really good policies in the local plan, I know that sometimes there'll be local, individual local planning applications of concern to you. And as Jack said, we're pretty limited to objecting if there's a threat to ancient woodland, but that doesn't limit you. Sometimes it can be quite hard to know how to approach these planning applications, which have vast amounts of documentation. I'm not talking about your neighbour's rear extension. I'm talking about, you know, a new town being built on the edge of a village. So if you're not sure how to approach it, there are two really important documents to read: the Design and Access Guide, which describes what they want to build, and the Planning Statement, which sets out their case for how it fits with the planning law. And often that will anticipate areas where it doesn't and say, although we don't comply with the detail of this bit of the planning law, we think we can get round it because we're compensating with this. So actually it can be a really good guide for grants to object to their proposals because they have to make the full case in the context of planning law. So the planning statement, always a good one to read. And if you're interested in the detail of trees, the ARB report. And it can feel quite hard to influence the decision, but the most important thing is to send in a written objection based on policy, not that you don't like the change to the view or the effect on house prices, or you think the applicant is a dodgy person. It has to be based on planning law. But if you write in a written objection, that will be reflected in the report that the planning officers put before another planning officer or for the councillors for decision. And it's worth asking for that decision to be taken by the councillors at the planning committee. Only about 10% of planning applications are determined at planning committee, but they're debated in public. You can go along and speak and ask questions rather than it be taken at a desk in a private office by a planning officer. Nothing wrong with the planning officers making the decisions, that's their job. But if you want to have that extra, your day in court, as it were, then it's worth asking for it to be called in to the planning committee. And even if it's going to go ahead, you can still ask for extra conditions there to protect woods and trees. Thanks, Jack. And then finally, just a summary of the things I ask for on behalf of the Woodland Trust when we respond to local plans. And if you're commenting on local plans, we would love to have you speaking up for these policies as well. So that's it from me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Bridget. So just before we wrap up and go to a few questions, just a little bit more from me about what people can do to protect trees from harm. Applying for a TPO. So this is a good way to try and stop a tree from being sort of I suppose willfully damaged, or sort of going to get ahead of any sort of proposals that you think might harm the tree, or any works that might sort of harm the tree. So you can apply to a local planning authority, ask for a TPO. You've got sort of 6 months for that TPO to be confirmed by the officer. Unfortunately, the TPO system means that they're only given on the basis of public amenity. So all those other great things that trees do, the sort of conservation value and ecological value that they hold, aren't really taken into consideration when a TPO is applied. So a tree in someone's back garden that is not visible to the public is not going to be given a TPO. One along a street, or might not even either if the council sort of kind of own it. But it does have to have some public amenity to it. They also won't be given to any tree where planning permission has been given, because planning permission overrides TPOs. And if you're doing so, if you're going down that route, trying to secure a TPO for a tree, encourage others to contact the council as well. The more people that contact the council about it, the more likely they are to pick it up. If you see any harm happening to sort of woods and trees, the organisations like ourselves, like Kent and Sussex Wildlife Trust, like RSPB, BugLife, we're not statutory authorities, so we can't take enforcement action against people who are causing harm to woods and trees. Instead, the best thing to do is safely take pictures and make a log of events, have a sort of record of what's going on, and then report any of that sort of damage or felling to appropriate authorities who might be able to take action. So that would be the likes of Forestry Commission, your local planning authority, Natural England, in some cases the police even. So there are authorities that can take enforcement action, you just have to get in contact with them. As Bridget said, writing an objection where an application for development threatens trees is pretty big. That's something where if a lot of people do it, it's a lot more likely that the council is going to sort of take your side and recognise the arguments. But as Bridget has already sort of said, you really have to make sure that you're looking at sort of material planning considerations and always sort of going to tie it back to policy too. And get other people to do the same. Don't just sort of go out there on your own, try and get friends, family, neighbours, others who might be sort of concerned to put in that objection as well. And always be clear, be concise. Planning officers are busy, they don't have all that a lot of time, so the more you write, the less they read. So try and be as concise as possible and always sort of tie it back to evidence and policy. And starting a community group. This is a really good one. So getting people together to sort of act together. Firstly, I suppose you need to determine if there's appetite locally. So there's many sort of ways to look at that. But social media is a really sort of a good one to start with, and possibly using stuff like your parish council, community village events and such like that as well. If you start a community group, you need to understand what your objectives and aims are. What is it that you want to sort of get out of the situation? Do you need to sort of assess that sort of down the line if things don't go sort of the way you want them to? And what do you want your members to do? What do you want people in the community group to do? How are they going to sort of help you as well? So establishing all this sort of stuff is really important. And you might also want to consider, are you going to need funding or legal status? Are you going to go down the route of legal enforcement action? We do see local community groups do it. It is expensive, but it can be done. And people are sort of keen to sort of crowdfund to make it happen as well. So it does help. And then always kind of come back and evaluate what you're doing, whether you are sort of working towards those objective names that you set out at the outset. So that's a little bit from us. Thank you very much for listening. We'd be more than happy to take questions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jack and Bridget. That was really interesting. I think Christina made a point around the local plans and how many of them are out of date. Christina, I can see you've got your hand up, so I'll bring you in if you'd like to talk a bit more about that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I preempted something you said. So I think I misunderstood what you're saying when you said that every area has a local plan, but obviously lots of areas have got out-of-date local plans. I'm actually from Wealden, and our latest plan is 1998. So it's just basically irrelevant. So we have very little protection from our local plan. There was a core strategy a bit later in 2013, but it's quite relevant. Anyway, my question is, I'm quite concerned because there's an application coming up to put 1,700 houses in a site that's got 3 areas of ancient woodland, and they're obviously sort of saying there are mitigations with buffers and everything, but I'm very concerned that they're going to be very isolated, very fragmented and degraded, and just wondered if you could maybe offer some specific policy advice on that. And also the Downsland appeal was actually a Wealden appeal as well, so we do have that to kind of support us in terms of damage, both direct and indirect, to ancient woodland. Thanks.
So perhaps I'll talk about the status of the local plan, and then Jack can talk about specifics. But yeah, I mean, Wealdon actually, although they all right, their local plan's very out of date, are kind of you know, ancient woodland protection heroes when it comes to planning, and you've got that great decision on your side. So it is true that every area has a local plan. Local plans don't lapse, but they do become carry less weight the older they get. A bit like people, really. Because the national planning policy framework may have been updated since a local plan was adopted, if it means that if there's a conflict between the local plan and the more recent NPPF, the NPPF will take priority, and that's why the local plan may carry less weight. And also, in particular, if the housing targets for an area have been increased since the local plan was adopted, a speculative planning application can say, even though we're applying, this is what happened at Downlands, we're applying for a site that wasn't in the local plan, because that local plan no longer meets the current needs, we should be allowed to go ahead anyway. And that's a real grey area. And a lot of local planning authorities put their plans on hold in the last couple of years because there was so much uncertainty with the changing national framework. And some cases, people campaigned against the local plan because they didn't like what was in it, and were pleased when the council decided not to go ahead with it because it was too politically difficult. But that can be a bit of an own goal, because if you don't have an up-to-date local plan, it can actually leave you more vulnerable to development than not. So yes, you're right, Christina. It's technically true that every area has a local plan, but some of them are more up to date and carry more weight than others. The slide I had focused on the Kent side, but I can also supply information for people in Sussex on the state of your local plan. Obviously, you're on the board, Christina, but there are other people who want to know where their local plan sits. Then just ask, and we can tell you.
Thank you.
And then on the sort of kind of specifics of the development, Christina, I probably need to see the plans to be able to sort of comment on that a little bit further. But I suppose the best thing to sort of going to do is look at it from, well, if it's not going to cause sort of kind of loss, what are the potential deterioration or the potential edge effects and indirect effects that might lead to deterioration of the ancient woodland, and sort of kind of breaking them down into their sort of kind of components. So recreational disturbance, has the developer sort of kind of assessed what foot traffic is going to be like in the area? Have they got a sort of kind of plan for sort of kind of access management into that woodland? Are they introducing new paths into the woodland? Those are the sort of things needs to be sort of looking out for. Pollution, so have they actually got proposals to address dust pollution during sort of kind of construction phase? Have they got, you know, stuff like construction an environmental management plan, or could they sort of do that at the sort of kind of condition stage? Have they got sort of kind of modelling for dust or sort of kind of increased traffic emissions, that sort of stuff as well? I think if you feel like you're sort of kind of working solo on this, it's always good to sort of kind of reach out to sort of people in your local area. I often find that when community groups come together, you do end up with people who have lots of different expertise in lots of different things. You might have someone who's a lawyer, someone who knows about sort of kind of housing needs, someone who's a bit of a sort of kind of makeshift ecologist or an ecologist in their own right. Those people do sort of exist in local communities and can be really helpful in these situations. I know with the sort of kind of Downlands Farm case, obviously in the Wealdon area as well, I believe Uckfield Town Council were involved in that, and you know, the sort of kind of group around there were really sort of kind of strong in sort of kind of coming together to oppose that scheme. So it's about sort of kind of breaking it down into its individual components that can impact in the ancient woodland, and providing as much evidence as you can. Local knowledge does really go far as well. One of the people, Dr. Martin Stenning, I believe, was involved in the sort of Downlands Farm case. People with that sort of kind of like local knowledge are brilliant, who can sort of kind of put evidence together. And sometimes there might need to be a sort of bit of sort of kind of crowdfunding in order to get consultants in who might require sort of kind of bit of money to help out. But I would also start with the Woodland Trust Planners Manual. I think that's a really good place to sort of have a look and give yourself an idea of how you might be able to sort of shape an objection as well. We've got some good stuff on the Planning Network for Nature as well, about how to write objection letters and such too.
Thank you very much. Sorry, what was the last one that you said? The Planning Network?
Yes, Planning Network for Nature.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was going to add to that, Christina, if you've got details of this planning proposal, if you want to drop it on the Sussex Planning Networks for Nature, then others will obviously know about it, but also people can come in and help sort of give you pointers if there's things that they think you should be flagging, and give you a bit of support around that.
Thanks very much. I'm a bit concerned that they're kind of putting in an initial application to kind of kite fly and basically see what the issues are, and then they'll come back with mitigations afterwards, just to, you know, like get over it, get it over the line in a way. So it's tricky to know how to strategically approach it, whether you go out with everything initially or whether you have something in your back pocket.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I suppose if you're looking to sort of kind of stop the development from happening, having something in your sort of kind of back pocket might be useful. I think we would probably take the approach as an organisation of getting everything out there on the table and making it really difficult for the developers to sort of kind of come back to so many different points, putting real doubt in the council's mind that they sort of do anything. Things often sort of going to crop up in these situations as well. You know, I know uncovered through sort of kind of doing that, either the development or the applicant has not done the right sort of kind of assessments or the right sort of kind of surveys to address such issues, and needs to go out and sort of kind of to do those to try and address them, and still might not sort of kind of get the sort of kind of right results. So yeah, I would generally sort of kind of pull on for the idea that you would sort of kind of get it all out there, and sort of kind of really try and sort of put the doubt in the sort of kind of council's minds that the development can be delivered without impact on ancient woodland.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any more questions for Bridget or Jack? Not seeing any more hands raised. Oh, Bridget wants to come back in.
Well, if there are no questions, I wondered if I could take a moment, and Jack might chip in on this as well, to talk about the Kent Mineral Sites Plan. It's not the sexiest planning document. So those of you who follow Kent Planning might have seen an email, had an email today, as I did, saying that Kent County Council has just adopted its Waste and Minerals Plan, which looks at its policies for waste and minerals provision, which sit at county level, not local planning authority level. But the bit that's missing from that is the Mineral Sites Plan, i.e. where any additional quarry capacity is going to be, because when they were proposing their mineral sites, which were going to be decided on the same timescale as the plan they've adopted today, the only site that was brought forward for hard rock was one that was completely unacceptable to us. And Jack led the most amazing campaign with the result that they're still trying to decide what to do with that plan. But we're expecting a consultation on the mineral sites plan possibly as soon as June, May or June this year. So that's definitely one to look out for, because it's one where ancient woodland could be under threat. But Jack knows more about the detail than I do. Muted, Jack.
Sorry, the detail of the specific development on Oakenwood.
It's a Hermitage quarry site, you know. And
Yeah. I mean, it's been it was an unfortunate case that sort of first started in 2012 when Hermitage Quarry was approved within 32 hectares of ancient woodland at that time. So huge amount of damage, probably one of the largest single amounts of damage that I've sort of seen in, well, it was before my time at the trust, but that I'm aware of anyway. You know, you're talking about more hectareage lost than HS2, which is a project that went all the way, well, was due to go all the way up England, now just London, Birmingham. But in sort of Oakenwood case, they are now coming back to take approximately 50 hectares more ancient woodland from the site. So, like Bridget said, we are trying to sort of convince them to not allocate that site. We had a really strong petition going with 25,000 signatures, and I'd probably say that probably got Kent County Council's backs up. Probably made them think, oh, people are really concerned about this. Maybe we shouldn't be going ahead with sort of allowing a site like this in the minerals plan. So yeah, I think the more sort of public support you can get for these types of things, the better. You know, we had support from other ENGOs as well, which I think was really important. But yeah, overall, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we can make sure that this site is protected. I know it's being sort of quarried for Kentish ragstone, which, you know, if you're a geologist, if there's any geologists among us, would know that there's only really that sort of specific belts where you could sort of quarry. However, I think we have to see that 50 hectares worth of ancient woodland is just not appropriate to sort of take out for the purposes of effectively rocks. Sorry to any geologists for that. But yeah, that's so heavily involved in that scheme, has gone quiet for a little bit. If anything does sort of rear its head again, we'll be right there campaigning fully against that one.
Great, thanks, Jack. And did either of you want to, I know you mentioned a couple of other cases you've been involved in. Did you want to touch upon that if no one else has any more questions? Did you want to mention the Lower Thames crossing, Darren?
Do I have to?
Only if you want
to. Painful one, really. Whether you sort of believe the sort of rights and wrongs behind the need for sort of scheme like that. I know where I would stand, and a lot of sort of colleagues would stand on that. The sort of impact of the Lower Thames crossing is pretty horrendous. I don't think we ever got to the sort of nub of whether how exactly how much ancient woodland is going to be lost to the scheme. They produce sort of different figures throughout their the development consent order process. So it was around the sort of 7 hectare mark anyway. Huge amount of sort of carbon emissions as well over the sort of operational period and in the construction phase. There are claims that it's the sort of greenest construction of any road. That's based on sort of mitigations and planting that they're sort of proposing. So the idea that they're offsetting the harm, I wouldn't believe that if I were you. It's a pretty devastating scheme. It looks like it's going to be going ahead. And there's a bit of a sort of concerning trend going on in government at the moment, where nature is being scapegoated. I don't know if you want to touch on some of that stuff happening, Bridget, but yeah, it's a difficult time. Bats, newts, spiders, all being sort of thrown under the bus in the sort of name of development and growth and economy. So it is concerning. We do need to sort of kick back against that, and we are working as jointly as possible among the sort of nature conservation charities to sort of oppose that rhetoric.
That's right. I mean, the tiny spiders of Ebbsfleet have been cast as the latest villain, overtaking newts and voles and bats as somehow, you know, holding up development. Of course, they're blissfully unaware that this is debates happening. But really, you know, the spiders aren't doing anything. They haven't spun the green tape that's holding up development. Rightly, I was going to say rightly or wrongly, but clearly rightly, successive governments have decided that endangered species are worth protecting, and you protect endangered species by protecting their habitats. It's as simple as that. So you can't on the one hand say we want to protect against further nature loss in the most nature depleted country in Europe, and say, but at the same time, we're quite happy to bulldoze their habitats. Now, Woodland Trust, we don't object to every greenfield scheme on principle. And actually, as Jack said, if there's a planning application coming forward, we will try and make it as good as possible for woods and trees rather than try and make it bad so that it gets rejected. That's not our agenda. But it's really important that these irreplaceable habitats, whether ancient woodland or other kinds, are protected, because once they've gone, they've gone. And it's in a country where only 10% of the land has been built on, there's plenty of unbuilt land to build on without taking out irreplaceable habitat. So there's more irreplaceable habitat from the point of view of woodland in Kent and Sussex and the rest of the country. That's why we are so keen to work with you, all of you, to protect what we've got, because we're living in a fantastic medieval wooded landscape, which the rest of England doesn't have. And sometimes we take it for granted when we see it every day, but it is very special and we have to fight to protect it. But it should be possible with people of goodwill and sound policies to get the homes we need and protect irreplaceable habitats. And that's certainly what we're trying to do.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bridget. Christina, you've got your hand up again. Did you want to come in on something?
Yeah, so just to completely agree, and the targeting of kind of specific species, whether newts or spiders or bats, is kind of the wrong way of looking at it, because they're the canaries in the coal mine, and we know that 1 in 6 native species is now in threat of extinction. So it's not actually just about that individual species, it's the fact they represent a whole ecosystem that's being undermined and sort of torn apart. And yeah, I just hate the euphemism spades in the ground, which they keep on saying, because it isn't, it's bulldozers. And like why they keep saying spades in the ground, I don't know. But I just wanted to agree, really. Sorry.
Great, fantastic, thank you. Just sort of mindful of time now, unless anyone has anything else that they wanted to ask. It's been great hearing from you both today, Bridget and Jack. We will get the recording of this presentation and the Q&A up on the Sussex and Kent Planning Networks for Nature. And if anyone thinks of any kind of further queries they might have, then please put those questions up on the network, and then others can answer, or indeed ourselves can respond to those. And as Jack was saying, there's some good resources from the Woodland Trust on the Planning Networks for Nature. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and a big thanks again to Bridget and Jack, and have a good evening.